When is the best time for the Winnipeg Jets to strike the trade market? Let's chat about that on tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets.
Your Locked On Jets, your daily podcast on the Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hey friends, and welcome to this evening's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. I'm your host, Harrison Lee, an avid Winnipeg Jets fan and an online blogger. You can follow me on Twitter at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. Thanks for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. If you like what you're hearing, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe on all of your favorite podcasting platforms and YouTube. Doing so, of course, is always free of charge and ensures you never miss another episode. Most of all, though, we just love and appreciate your support. Tonight's episode, I want to chat about a little bit of some trade stuff, and more specifically, when the time might be right for the Jets to go for the jugular, because Winnipeg has two very different approaches they could take this season. Either they could be really aggressive and try to really improve this team ahead of the start of the year, or they just wait more for the trade deadline and try to assess as they get deeper into the season. And I think both are very valid approaches for very different reasons. And I want to speak on why I think there might be some merit to being patient, especially with how this Jets team is currently built. So we'll talk about that. And I also want to talk a little bit about the upcoming next few years of the increased revenue for the NHL and how the Jets are going to have to maybe change how they've done things to sort of navigate a very new era of the NHL's free agent market. But before we dive into all of the fun stuff, did want to let you know that today's episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNHL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. Now, I mentioned that the Jets have two different doors they can open when it comes to the trade market. And I think for Winnipeg, it's a very interesting one because traditionally I am all about being aggressive and taking advantage of opportunities when you see it. With this current Jets team, though, I'm starting to wonder which version they really see themselves as. Do they think that they can be aggressive on the market? Are they after a Mason McTavish? Or are they doing what I could also see and being patient to see how the season starts? I think this year's team, and I mentioned this maybe last episode or the previous one, this year's squad is not really all that similar to last year's team. You have a lot of different parts. You have a lot of different line combinations now, and there may be some stuff in the top six that remains pretty similar, but the bottom six is going to be a very different shuffled deck, and I think that's going to have a bigger impact than maybe people are expecting. Might it be good? Sure, but I would anticipate Winnipeg having perhaps some more unanticipated troubles to start the season. Not to say that they're going to be at the bottom of the division or anything, but obviously last year, the Jets started like 15-1. That's probably not going to happen this year, barring a really big shocker. I think that would be crazy for any team to try and repeat, let alone, a squad like Winnipeg where they have had some very big departures and have brought in a whole host of new guys. Plus, they're going to be dealing with one of their most important centers missing time and coming back from a pretty serious surgery. So this Jets team, I feel like, has kind of been thrown a little bit into the blender, and we'll see how it all kind of shapes up. But I feel like, this year's team might be better served being a little bit patient and getting closer to the trade deadline. Now, that's a long ways to wait, and I think if things really fall in favor of the Jets being able to shop their first rounder early, okay, I could see that, but I also look at that first rounder as being a really crucial pick. The Jets, if they are not really looking to be a playoff contender this year and are maybe slipping more towards like a wild card spot or something, which I think is, very possible given just how high the barrier of the playoff entry was last year, the Jets might want to think about what they should do to protect that pick. I've often said that when it comes to having a rough year, the biggest thing is to make sure that you use your futures to really bring in a big game changing talent. And this year's draft is one where if you have a rough season, it's not a big deal. You might actually come away with a really special prospect who can turn the tide of your whole franchise. Now, the Jets are one of those teams that often pick in the middle of the pack. It's kind of the blessing and the curse of a Connor Hellebuck is that his floor is always so high that you really don't get into the top 10 range. There's only been a very scant few times where that's happened, and that was really before Hellebuck really established himself as an elite keeper. So the Jets probably won't get into lottery pick range, not at least on the high odds of that. But if they end up more in the middle of the pack, and maybe they're feeling like, the playoffs might not be the most, achievable outcome this year. Not necessarily just making it, but actually going on a deep run. Then this could be the time that you really make a play and see if you can try and fish out maybe an extra first rounder or two. Obviously, that's going to be very difficult with how much of a premium those picks are probably going to be. But if you keep yours and maybe even try and move some of these trade deadline rentals, especially if the Jets have maybe juiced one or two of them, there's a real chance that Winnipeg could do some damage. Even second and third round picks could be really valuable for Winnipeg, especially because this Jets team is just really darn good at drafting. I don't know about you, but I feel like the last few years, Winnipeg just doesn't really miss on picks. Even their fourth and fifth rounders usually have some intriguing upside. Obviously, a lot of these guys may not be NHLers, but I think the fact that the Jets continue to find guys with some really good tool sets, some really nice floors, and some legitimate upside, even in middle six capacities, is fantastic. If you get NHLers past the first round or two, you're having a pretty good time. And I would say that for the most part, the Jets, when you look at their draft picks, have a lot of guys who are fairly projectable. There are some players that they'll maybe take some bigger home run swings on. Affray obviously could be one of those. Klingzel, another type, angle maybe a little bit harder to project. But these swings that you take late in rounds, the Jets have gotten really good at trying to maximize value. So if they go futures heavy this season, I really don't think that's a bad idea. The Jets could really overhaul the future core that they're building around and really give Scheifele and Hellebuck and whoever else commits to this team long term some real stability waiting in the wings. Now, it is a tough sell because it does mean that if the Jets start to slip the season, you would fall into maybe some attendance issues. Maybe you'd have people complaining about the quality of the team. But I feel like, in my mind, a season where maybe you're transitioning a little bit and you don't quite have the expected playoff run that you were anticipating might not be the worst thing. The Jets really could position themselves for a big future, in part because the last talking point tonight is that the league is moving in a new direction. And with that, the Jets are going to have to adjust. And I think one of the best ways Winnipeg can kind of go back to the drawing board and really adapt to what's going to be a very different league with increased revenue and a bigger cap is, you're going to have to start really drafting and developing and bringing those talents to the NHL level. That's been something that the Jets haven't really done in several years. They haven't had to. But I think as we move into this new era of the league, which is going to last for a few years, it won't be forever, but there's going to be some very big changes. We've talked about it before as being an upcoming era of haves and have-nots, and I think it's going to force Winnipeg to kind of be a little creative. But hey, if you get creative, sometimes you get smarter, and I think that's where the Jets have a lot of opportunities to grow as an organization and take advantage of stuff like this to really move ahead. So all of this to say, this season, I think, really has so many ways it could go. Even if it doesn't work out in the way that I think a lot of folks are hoping it to or imagining it to, I think, maybe a down season isn't a bad thing. And I'm not necessarily expecting one, but I do think, this Jets team is going to have a more harder cap on the ceiling than it did maybe last year. Last year's team probably would have been the one that you'd hope would really go on a deep run. So with that in mind, maybe the time to make those trades is just being patient and waiting to see what falls in Winnipeg's lap. That is often when they are at their best. But if the Jets do get aggressive, there's a team that might be worth giving a call. That, of course, is the Pittsburgh Penguins. They've got a few players they could move, and maybe Erik Karlsson in a Winnipeg Jets uniform could look real sexy. Ever wish managing your money felt easier? With Monarch Money, it can. Whether you're growing your savings or planning a big purchase, Monarch puts you in the driver's seat. It's like having your own personal GM giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money is more than just a budgeting app, though. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place. So, in addition to managing your money, you're also building your wealth. Imagine having Chevy looking over your entire life savings and all of your financial obligations and contributions. He can make those decisions to help you build the most successful winning team, and Monarch Money does the exact same thing. It helps you filter out maybe there's some of those takeouts and subscriptions you don't need. Maybe it's also a great opportunity for you to start mapping out your financial future with your partner. They have shared account features, and it's all in one super convenient app. So take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNHL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNHL for half off your first year. Hey friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us on tonight's episode as we're chatting a little bit about some upcoming shifting tides in the NHL and which way the Jets could really go. Now, I just advocated for the Jets to maybe be a little bit patient before making a big trade splash, in part because their first round pick, which would have to be part of a major play if they make one, I think it's going to have some real value that's going to grow as the season goes on. Partly because I think the West has really improved for the most part, and we all saw how tough it was for the Jets to remain in first place last year, right? Imagine now with a team that's going to be weaker than it was last season, going up against the Utahs and the St. Louises that have started to really improve and make some big acquisitions. It's going to be trickier. And I think for the Jets, this might not be a season where you want to go all in at the trade deadline unless you're in a really good spot and things feel great. But if Winnipeg is like dead set on really trying to go full bore this year, and if they really feel like they have to, then there's a team that they really should be calling. The Pittsburgh Penguins are looking to kind of tear things down and rebuild. Obviously, Crosby's kind of in the last years of his career. Malkin's probably close to retirement. Letang, he's almost everyone of like that original 07, 08 core that we all remember. They're all getting close to 40. So this Penguins team needs to move in a different direction. And Dubas has shown that he's pretty aggressive when it comes to trying to reformat a lot of the depth around this team. I think he's kind of hit the limit, though, of what you can reasonably squeeze out of the squad. And because of that, he has really made it clear that the Penguins are open for business. But he's asking big prices, and that's going to be tricky for a team like Winnipeg. The Jets don't like to throw out a lot of big assets. Usually when they do, it's because they're making trades for disgruntled players. But seeing Rucker McGroarty do well early in his pro tenure with the Penguins makes me wonder if Pittsburgh would be open to dealing with the Jets again. Obviously, this is not going to be the same situation as it was, but Pittsburgh has guys like Rust and Raquel and Carlson still on their roster. All three of those guys could bring different levels of value to the Jets. Of the three, I'd probably be least excited about Rust. Brian, I think, is starting to slow down a bit, although he is still really good. So when I say I'm less excited, it's all relative, right? We're not talking about a bad player. I think Rust is still pretty good, and I think he would actually really fortify Winnipeg's middle six and offer some nice up and down the lineup versatility. But he is 33. He's not as healthy and young as he once was, and that could be a little bit of an issue as you move past this coming season. So just something to think about. But the two guys that are going to get the most attention are Raquel and Letang. Not Letang, Carlson. Letang may get some interest, but, I think at this stage of his career, he's probably not going to be long for a real contender. Carlson, though, Carlson's still really good. He's been putting up results pretty similar to his San Jose Sharks days. Now, the thing with Eric that you always kind of have to keep in mind is that his primary contributions are going to be offensive, right? He's one of those roaming blue liners who may not be as defensively attuned on every shift, but his offensive production is so good and so impactful at moving the puck up and down the ice and continuing to create offensive chaos that if you pair him with the right guy in, say, a situation like Winnipeg, you could find an absolute monster in him. His biggest problem, though, aside from the trade protection, he's got a huge cap hit. And even with retained salary, I think it'd be hard for the Jets to find a way to make that happen. The guy that I think makes the most sense for Winnipeg to try and pry out is probably a Raquel. Now, my only concern is that Raquel's going to be expensive too. His cap hit's very reasonable. It's $5 million for the next 3 years, but that is also going to mean that he's going to be a very hotly desired player, right? I think a lot of teams will be after a good top six center who's had really big career resurgences with the Penguins, putting up 60, 70 points. A guy like that's going to be fairly expensive. And if you're the Jets, I just wonder how worth it really is to try and prolong this version of the Jets core. Unless you bring in a younger player, I just feel like if you're starting to try to acquire all these veterans, unless it really is like a game breaker in the presence or in the shape of like a Carlson, I just don't know how worth it is to go down this route. You're going to sink a lot of assets into it. You're going to spend probably your first rounder and some big prospects to bring in, a guy who could move the needle. But I just think the Jets would be better served trying to draft top-end talent with real upside that can really raise Winnipeg's ceiling. I think the Jets have kind of maxed out what they can do as this current team is constructed. And a President's Trophy is stunning. I think anyone who says otherwise is really not giving the team enough credit for that accomplishment. But I also think it doesn't necessarily mean that the Jets are built for the playoffs. I think Winnipeg has kind of shown that they've hit where they can reach. And for as good as this team is, I don't know that adding a bunch of veterans necessarily moves them in the direction of like a top end contender. The Panthers have this model team, and I think that squad is built in a very specific way that's just above what the Jets currently have and what they could add reasonably in a trade. If you start swinging for the McTavishes of the world, you start to have a different conversation. But I think if you're still in the Rust, Raquel, or even maybe Carlson territory to a degree, you're going to have some real hard limits to just how long you can keep this going for. So that conversation is certainly of interest, but I think for the Jets, if you're looking around and you're maybe talking to the Penguins, I wonder what it would take to get like a Novak or a Tomasino out. Obviously, these guys have some perhaps notable limits to just how impactful they're going to be. But if you're looking for some really good value stopgaps until you can really commit to a future core, and you're looking for guys who are still in their 20s, who are not over the hill, and who will still probably be good for the next couple of years, look at these guys. Tomasino, he's not really super expensive, and I don't quite know where Dubas is in the contract negotiation process. Novak still has another year of control after this, and I don't think either would be crazy expensive. Tomasino is also 24, so for the Jets, that would be a really ideal age. He's around the age of McTavish, and he puts up pretty good middle six results with some good finishing talent. He also plays center. Novak, another 28-year-old who plays center. He's traditionally put up really good second or third line results, depending on your deployments, and he costs you $3.5 million per season. These are kind of guys that I would look at more so than the bigger names, because I feel like, A, they're not going to cost you as much, and B, you can actually count on them for more than just a couple of seasons. Tomasino especially, him being just 24, I think would make him a really interesting target for the Jets. Novak, you've heard me talk about endlessly on previous trade deadline stuff. He's a guy that I wish the Jets had pried out of Nashville, but I get it as to why they didn't. They had their eggs in the Brock Nelson basket. Didn't work out. Probably for the best in some ways. And so now it's time to sort of reevaluate and try and figure out how to make the most of your assets without paying too much. So if the prices for Raquel, Rust, and Carlson are astronomical, go in the margins. Look for where Dubas is maybe not thinking, the most expensive price tags. Find those value players. They can really fortify Winnipeg's depth and maybe give the Jets some ideas for how to construct this team going forward. Tomasino might even have some real untapped potential that the Jets could tease out, and maybe he answers your 2C question for the future. Novak could probably do something similar, even if maybe his future isn't quite as long. So, the Jets have so many options. I think that's what is great about this offseason. They haven't done anything crazy like commit to a Brock Besser. So even though that was probably what they wanted to do, it not happening, I think, is for the best. But I say all of this because I think, the upcoming league that we're going to start to see over the next few years is going to put the Jets towards the back of the pack when it comes to market power, right? And that necessitates the Jets changing strategy, looking at things from a different lens than I think they traditionally have. We see it happen in, say, soccer and or European football, as a lot of you will know it for. When you have a lot of leagues and teams with a ton of money, and there are just small market teams that can't quite keep up in the same way. The Jets are going to be that sort of team. However, I think this is where draft and develop can really change the Jets' fortunes for the better. Hey, friends, and welcome back to tonight's closing thoughts on this episode of Locked On Jets. Obviously, we're just wrapping up and talking a little bit about trade market stuff and how to construct this team going forward. And I think Winnipeg actually has a very unique opportunity over the next few years dealing with a changing league that, on the face of it, does not favor Winnipeg. Rising revenues, big caps, the rising ceiling, all of that should put the Jets behind the eight ball. It's just the truth. Winnipeg's a smaller market. They don't quite have the attraction power of the big spending teams. It's not, it's something that I think should be taken as an insult. It's just how the world is, right? But I think the Jets have an opportunity to rethink the way that they've built their teams the last couple of years with a new refocused emphasis on draft and develop. I think draft and develop is really something that the Jets have struggled to do the last few years because they have a lot of veterans. They've tended to run it back for many years. They've gotten a lot of successful playoff revenue out of it, but they really haven't gone very deep. And so I think Winnipeg, business-wise, has been very stable. That makes them a profitable proposition. They still, get enough money, even if there were some moments where maybe things were a little shaky. They've adjusted to that. They've tried to improve the on and off ice experiences. So there's a lot of stuff that's happening in the margins where I think the Jets have set themselves up for a better future. But on the ice, when it comes to the team, that's still been a little bit of a tricky process. But I think if the Jets really commit to this idea of graduating players to the NHL, they're going to reap the rewards. And I think they've acknowledged that quietly with how they've drafted. You heard me talk maybe the past couple of episodes about the Jets shifting their drafting philosophy. You've seen a lot more players with relatively solid floors and very projectable tool sets at the NHL level, even if their ceilings might not be as high. Part of that's just because the Jets maybe aren't drafting super high to begin with, but I think a lot of what Winnipeg has emphasized is guys who are very defensively responsible, who have aggressive offensive motors and are sort of volume creators and skate really well. All of those traits, I think, are really important pieces for getting the Jets into a more future-focused team. And sure, it might take a while before we really see that, but as the league starts to get into this era of haves and have-nots, which, listen, the Jets ain't going to be alone. There are going to be other teams that struggle with this. I think of Nashville. I think of Minnesota. A lot of teams are going to be dealing with some small market stuff that makes it trickier. And calling Minnesota a small market feels wrong in a lot of ways, but when you look at how that team spends and what they tend to attract, it doesn't really feel like a particularly big market team either. So all these squads that maybe have some attraction issues for top talents, I think we're going to all be in the same boat. And so this is where the Jets have a grand opportunity to overhaul their development structure so they really start graduating guys to the NHL level. We've seen too many years of very few ELCs supporting this roster. I'm hoping that over the next 2 to 3 seasons, that really starts to change. And if this season is the first sign of it really shifting, I think that's a great thing organizationally. I don't really care where the Jets finish in the regular season, so long as, if they're in a playoff spot, that they have a good team that's capable of competing in the playoffs, that they give themselves whatever seeding, advantages that they can. Obviously, the President's Trophy is sick and we all love it. But for me, it's not the most important thing. Once you have one, focus on making sure that your team is playoff competitive. The other stuff is great. I love regular season awards as much as the next person, but we know that the goal for a lot of teams is still to push for that cup. That's what everyone wants. It's what the Jets want now. It's what they need. And so, as the league maybe pushes against Winnipeg with how free agency is going to work, the Jets really need to go back to the drawing board and go back to those ELCs. That, I think, is where you're going to have a lot of value. I think you're also going to convince guys to really stick around if you give them opportunities and they really thrive. It can be a really mutually beneficial relationship. And I think the Jets, again, are starting to consider that a little more seriously. They haven't had to do it the last several years, but as we move into this new era of the league, I think that kind of stuff is going to be what Winnipeg really has to focus on. And if they do, I think long term, it's just going to be healthier for the organization. No, they may not win a cup with this group, and that's going to be a really bitter pill. But you know what? I think they can still be a fantastic team in their own right. And that's what I continue to look for. I don't have to watch the world's best team. I just want to watch the guys kick a bunch of butt, do really well, and have, a lot of fun in the playoffs. The last few years, we really haven't had a lot to cheer for in the postseason. This past playoff run was the best we've had, and it was only 6 wins. I think this team can go deeper. I think that there's a future of this squad that is faster, better, more skilled, and deeper up and down the lineup that can win by committee and show the league that the Jets don't have to have the McDavids of the world to win a lot of postseason success. This team, I think, if they go back to what they used to do in 17-18, is going to have one heck of a run in the future. But to do that, they're going to have to navigate some trickier waters. No one's going to say this is easy. I certainly won't. But I hope that as they continue to modernize the org and come into more of this draft and develop model again and really recommit to it, I think that there's a real opportunity for the Jets to really take a lot of these talents they've drafted and put them to real NHL work. I think Winnipeg has gotten smart about their drafting. They're not wasting picks these days. So hopefully as they move into this new future of the league, that they are prepared for it and that they have a future Winnipeg Jets team that we can all love and adore. But curious to know how you feel about the future of the Jets. Are you looking forward to the next few years? Do you look forward to guys like Walton and and some of these other guys? Let me know in the comments below or at my social medias at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. For tonight's episode, though, that's going to be all the time that we have. I thank you so much for listening and making us your first listen of the day every day. We'll see you back here next week, so have a great night, and as always, go Jets go.